David Schenker, welcome back to the Beirut Banyan.
Hey, good to see you, Ronnie.
It's good to see you, and thank you for letting me interview you in this current state. I
Uh,
apologize for being a bit beaten up, but it's always a pleasure to talk.
Well, I'm glad to see you're on the mat.
Thank you. Thank you. It goes without introduction, former United States Assistant Secretary of State for Near East Affairs and a current senior fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. You've been around, you know this part of the world quite well. I think you're quite intimate, not just with what's been happening, but with a lot of the actors as well, shaping policy, both on the Lebanese side and the US side. Just to make this episode timely, I'd like to start with what appears to be a slip up of sorts. Um, Choice words used by an American official, Tom Barak, and somehow it feels like he should have been a little more delicate and finessed his words better when he was talking to the Lebanese press. I'd like your take on that, what you thought about that occasion, and maybe what the Lebanese atmosphere is really at the end of the day, and why it's not so based on whether you're civilized or not, or for that matter, animalistic. So
Yeah.
your take.
Well, listen, it's a regrettable, I think, really unfortunate choice of words that really put a cloud over the entire visit. The Lebanese press is energetic, enthusiastic, robust, and it's a little chaotic. I've experienced it myself when I was serving in government. But to me, the Lebanese press represents sort of the finest tradition of freedom of speech, the elements of freedom of speech in Lebanon. And they get a lot of stories that are quite proficient and experts at their craft. So I think a lot of this has been blown out of proportion, but yeah, regrettable.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. And I think that is the majority take in the country, whether you're sympathetic to Hezbollah or not. And hopefully it's not repeated because I share your assessment that this is, and if there's been a eloquent voice challenging Hezbollah's status quo in the last years, it's many people in the room that were probably ready to ask him sophisticated questions. And it was
Yeah,
a
and these
slip up. Yeah,
paid dearly over the years for, pursuing the truth.
right.
Samir Seer, dozens of others, my good friend Lokman Saleem. This is regrettable.
And I think it also may have shelved the more important story that we were hoping to focus on with his visit. And that story, I think, is best summed up in your most recent policy analysis that we're going to jump into. It's on the Washington Institute's website. It's titled Lebanese Moment of Truth. It was published just 2 days ago, so I guess it's hours apart from that diplomatic slip up by Tom Barak. But let's jump into the piece. I sense there's a, like you said, a moment of truth in the title, and also many variables that have to line up together for Lebanon to actually work this time. And you pointed it out in several ways. I'm going to highlight a few things that it's very difficult to seeing them lining up together. And there are 6 points. It's first the seriousness of the Lebanese army's proposal, which we have yet to see. That's days away from now, submitted to the cabinet, of course, under immense pressure for that to be the first of two deadlines. This is a proposal meant to effectively dismantle all sub-state groups by the end of the year. So it's an ambitious proposal. That's one. Two is the nature of Hezbollah's response. We don't know what that looks like, and you point out that we don't know whether it'll be violent or not, and it's premature to see what Hezbollah can do in its weakened capacity. Then there's the third component, which is Beirut's political commitment, meaning whether or not the Lebanese government is capable or willing to push through with this historic precedent for the Lebanese government. And sorry, I'm going to keep listing them because I really want to emphasize a lot of things have to happen at once. The
Yes.
fourth is Israel's response, or for that matter, how Israel responds, which we haven't seen yet, to these type of gestures. I think this is fair to say that Tom Barak came empty-handed from the Israeli side, that the Israelis have not done anything yet, despite Lebanon's posturing opposite Hezbollah's weapons. The fifth is US pressure. And what that looks like long term, not just on Lebanon, of course, but towards Israel. And then there's the sixth, which is Israel's withdrawal. Now, if I
That's a
were to
lot.
look,
That's a
that's a
lot there.
there's a lot on the table. And by the way, this is how the policy analysis begins. So we can pick at them one by one. But is that a fair way to look at it? This is not just it's not just a historic moment, but it's way too early to see whether or not some, if not all, of these variables can line up in Lebanon's favor. So let's start there.
Yeah, but you got it just right. There are a lot of moving parts. Um, I don't know if they're going to fall together. I think that you know that we should take these deadlines, the first of the year, the 2 week period, the 45-day period. All this is tertiary. Um, you know, uh, the important part is regaining the kind of momentum that Lebanon really lost. Over the first 7 months, right? You had a ceasefire. There was some movement in the south, but then no decision on whether to move on to the second phase in the north. No thinking about this. A lot of vacillating. Um, you know, Obviously difficult decision to make. And then whether the LAF, which is you know great reputation, great capabilities, committed troops, as we saw in the Battle of Beirut and Nar al-Bared. These folks are committed to defending the nation state, whether they will embrace as well this kind of mission, and whether the government, under enormous pressure and with elections approaching, will stick to it. And finally, as you point out, the key element is what Israel does. So, Barak had traveled with Morgan to Israel, hoping to get what Axios reported would be a sort of holding back on certain types of strikes against Hezbollah targets in the south. Didn't get it, according to the report. But you know, what they will get if there is actually movement, right? So it wasn't exactly something for nothing. You got a government commitment in Lebanon to move ahead, and that was, a commitment, right? And you're expecting Israel to actually do something concrete in return, right? I think, we can say there should have been something in goodwill. What you got was a tweet from Netanyahu saying that was a great decision from the government of Lebanon. I think, the real test will be when there's a plan on the table and they start to move forward. And then I think there can be a real expectation from the part of the government of Lebanon that Israel will do something. And if they don't, there's going to be, I think, a big problem. We're seeing, I think, some frustrations from the Trump administration with Israel already.
If I could ask the seriousness of the current government's repositioning towards Hezbollah, that under immense pressure, they've effectively outlined a political case for the disarmament of all sub-state groups. Maybe on paper that does not look more than standard affairs. In other words, they're doing in essence the bare minimum of what is required not just in Lebanese constitution, but in most Security Council resolutions that have already indicated the case for all of this to be made. Yet this is a historic moment for Lebanon, and actually predates Hezbollah. This is going back to the Cairo Accord, the Cairo Agreement. It's the dismantlement of what dragged Lebanon into civil war over 5 decades ago. That may be a commitment only, but do you see any serious progress being made at this stage without more than just a tweet from the Netanyahu government or Netanyahu which he does on occasion, trying to flatter the Lebanese and, in a way, divorce the Lebanese from Hezbollah. I think he could do this several times. And I think the Israeli government can say the opposite too. And you have Israeli ministers that have called on sending Lebanon back to the Stone Age as well. It's the same government. So is there more to be done than just thank you for doing your job from the Israeli side that could encourage maybe that this is not just on paper, that this is not just a commitment, that this is going to become policy?
Listen, two things. One, the first is I'd say, forgive the Israelis for being skeptics. There's been so many false starts in Lebanon, right? The commitment back in 2006 to 1701, right, which never got implemented, right? We had what, however many years since then where we didn't do 1701, right? So we've recommitted to what we committed before, and now we actually are doing it. Will they move forward? I think there's a great deal of cynicism about this across the border. But I would have thought, just from where I sit, I think I would have been hoping that you could get a little bit more than just a tweet from the prime minister. Um, if not a if not a holding back in strikes, perhaps one of the hilltops, occupied hilltops, being removed and replaced with one of these border posts that the British are funding right now, currently along your border with Syria, where they've planted a whole bunch of these. They appear to be successful. They put them in spots in the Bekaa Valley. Maybe replace one of those. It didn't happen, but I think this is in the realm of the possible.
I assume that Israeli measures will also better posture America's position right now with the Lebanese government, that the Americans will come and show something can happen on the other side too. In other words, this is not just the Lebanese government under immense pressure trying to rein in what has been over 4 decades of Iranian influence in the country. So does that help make America's case too? Not just for 1701, but the full disarmament of Hezbollah north and south of the Litani. I assume that this is perhaps a potential obstacle to American policy here. Do you agree with that or not?
Yeah, no, I do. I think there's been a reticence on the part of the administration to push Israel on some issues. Now we've seen them do it twice. We saw the government of the United States beat up Israel for hitting the Syrian army and the Ministry of Defense in Syria and told them to back off. We'll see what happens with the most recent strikes. But we got a respite after that. And we saw the government of the United States tell Israel to turn around and not retaliate for Iranian violations, initial violations of the ceasefire from the 12-day war.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's possible. We've seen that this administration is willing to draw a line and have the Israelis comply. And I think you saw in Barak's proposal, the one that was printed out, the leaked Nida al-Watan, that there were some pretty severe consequences potentially for Israel if they didn't comply. Like one being the United States allowing Security Council censure, and the other being, on the deconfliction front, which means we're not going to share friend or foe information in aircraft, and which would in fact prohibit the Israelis from flying in certain areas. This is serious stuff.
The seriousness on that side, and also the seriousness of whether or not the Lebanese army can do more than its current capacity with limited but important political cover. I want to get into the first part, the Lebanese army proposal that has yet to be handed to the government. I personally do not see a Lebanese army that can combat Hezbollah militiamen, Hezbollah supporters, Hezbollah civilians. I don't see the Lebanese army using force. And for that reason alone, I think this is, at the end of the day, a negotiated settlement, not a military confrontation. I may be wrong, but it's very difficult for me to see the Lebanese army willing to take that risk, or for that matter, most maybe more importantly, the Lebanese government pushing the Lebanese army to make that kind of risk as well. And for me, that's where things more or less stop. That without negotiations, there isn't disarmament. And I'll offer just a parallel example. It may be cosmetic right now, but the Palestinian armed camps, there are some weapons being handed to the Lebanese army. That's
It's
post
Fatah,
negotiation.
but
Exactly.
it's Fatah. It's not
Exactly.
Hamas. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's negotiation with Mahmoud Abbas, and it's already done. The negotiations are done, and they've been done for months. If anything, this is just a very slow but possible end to some weapons in some camps. Hezbollah is a different creature altogether. It's a very, very complicated and also a sponsored group. I don't see the Lebanese army making more risks there. Now, that
But,
for me is where things begin and end. Do you see it
well,
that blunt?
um, well, yes and no. I agree with you. I think in Lebanon, Palestinians are the low-hanging fruit, right? The Lebanese, by and large, love the Palestinian cause, um, based on how they treated the Palestinian in Lebanon. They don't like the Palestinians too much, certainly the ones that are there. Um, I think uh, that it's certainly more sensitive with Hezbollah. Um, I disagree with our good friend Michael Young, that we have to wait for the Iranians to make the decision. Right? The Iranians aren't going to make that decision. Right now, they're doubling down on the Houthis, they're doubling down on the Hashid, and they're not giving away or bargaining away or dealing away Hezbollah, right? Um, so, um, the question for me, and you're right, the LAF is not going to want to do this by confrontation. They want to do it by consensus. What the president has said.
Hmm.
Um, do you think will Hezbollah open fire on the LAF? I mean, they've killed LAF before. They certainly killed the helicopter pilot. A couple of years ago, their arms killed 6 LAF troops in the south that were trying to dismantle a position. Will they target Hezbollah? Will they target the LAF? Will they kill LAF troops?
It's an open question, and I don't know. But I also see it in reverse as well, that I can't see the army shooting at them too.
Yeah.
I guess it's more that if Iran is not brought into the discussion, the way Michael Young outlined, and you're right, he seems to advocate more of a track two diplomacy, or maybe a quiet type of diplomacy that seeks to figure out what Iran would take in return. If that's not to happen, what kind of consensus could emerge? I still think of Iran as having the final say when it comes to what Hezbollah looks like long term. Do you see another route for Hezbollah that's not, in a way, so heavily dependent on Iran and what Iran says? I can't imagine that emerging in the near term.
Well, listen, I don't see the Iranians moving on this issue.
Yeah.
This is, the A team, or, what's left of the A team. They're heavily invested. Their credibility, as they didn't show up to help Hezbollah when Hezbollah was being decimated by the Israelis. They did nothing. Wished Hezbollah good luck, and stood on the sidelines. But they're not going to deliver the coup de grace. you know. So that would be the simplest, most effective route. Um, the Houthis are the Hezbollah is not like the Houthis that have this sort of element of independence to them. Operational independence. They get the sponsorship, they're proxy, but they're not 100% beholden. Hezbollah is very much a proxy. They take orders from Tehran. And I just don't see that order forthcoming. Now, perhaps um, there will be a diminishment of support over time when the South is not rebuilt,
Right.
when when Hezbollah can't open its kindergartens this year because it doesn't have money, because the government in Lebanon's cracking down because of international sanctions, because Iran is not delivering funds. There's a whole bunch of potential scenarios here, but that's going to take a lot of time. And of course, in the meanwhile, Hezbollah is going to try to reconstitute the best it can.
And I think it's also fair to say that Hezbollah has very few choices left too. And because of how degraded they are, and because of their limitations in terms of violence against the state, I don't think Hezbollah can repeat what it did between 2006 and 2008. In other words, fighting the state's decisions in a way that led to May 7, 2008, and there's a coup d'etat of sorts of the Lebanese government and an outright delegitimization of the state. Their ministers and their allies have not resigned, and the capabilities that they once had to target Lebanese officials, we don't know what they are right now, but I would assume that they're also constrained too. And that means Hezbollah has been curtailed to a point. But it's also too early to know what the reaction looks like. And I think that's maybe we're going to see that play out in the next few weeks. I'll jump to commitment, though, Beirut's commitment to the initiative. I see the deadlines as a byproduct of immense pressure. And without that pressure, I think it's Joseph Aoun's story, and it lingers for years on end. That, in other words, dialogue may have never materialized much, and Nawaf Slam would have been left off the hook entirely, and we would have a very slow status quo reemerge that there remains something armed called Hezbollah. Yet, under immense pressure, the Lebanese government has taken that first bold step. But this is under intense pressure. And I'd like to ask you something that requires going back in time, something that maybe both of us know enough about because we were old enough now to look back towards this.
Yeah.
20 years ago, there was international attention on Lebanon, and it came and went. In the 1980s, there was more international attention on this country to the point that international peacekeepers were roaming the streets of Beirut. And many, many Marines were killed in the process. This is the beginning of Hezbollah, the way we understand it. And that peacekeeping effort fizzled out fast.
Yeah.
And international attention is always fleeting to me. I would assume it's fleeting to you as well, somebody who's observed government and somebody who's taken part in government and diplomacy. Is that a fair characterization of defining maybe the time limit to this round, that there's nothing guaranteed long term? This could be also a fleeting moment of pressure.
Well, it's a fleeting opportunity, right? You have the degradation of Hezbollah. They're going to try and rebuild. They're going to try and recruit. And you're racing against the clock. And the clock is also a clock of attention, right? We saw this already in the first 7 months. There was a sort of a drop in the momentum in Lebanon. And then lo and behold, Lebanon's not invited to Riyadh. And the president meets with Ahmed al-Shara, president of the United States, meets Ahmed al-Shara. Then there's an end of sanctions on Syria, a donor conference. The Saudis roll in, the Qataris fund energy, power stations. They're suddenly rebuilding the electric grid, and nobody's going to Lebanon,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the way to, I mean, listen, a lot of the attention, not only back in the 80s when attention diminished because of the sort of redeployment to the sea of the United States after the Marine barracks, but it diminished after the Cedar Revolution, right? Everything looked great. You were on a roll, and then there was a electoral agreement. And suddenly, the victors who kicked Syria out signed an electoral agreement with Hezbollah. And, and divide the spoils post Syrian occupation. And then all of a sudden Syria, the sort of attention on Lebanon waned. They moved on. The Bush administration moved on to invite Syria to Annapolis. Yeah, attention on Lebanon is fleeting. And part of it is, you know, for Trump anyway, he's looking for wins,
Mm.
right? He gets wins in the Gulf, investment in the United States. He wants countries to join the Abraham Accords. He wants his Nobel Peace Prize. And if Lebanon, doesn't do its part, right? I mean, I always said when I was in government, I can't help Lebanon unless Lebanon helps itself. Right? You guys got to take the step, and then build it, and they will come. If you guys do the work, their money will flood in.
I'm glad you said that. That's actually, it's always been in the back of my mind that the each time is following Israeli war. In 2006, in the 1980s, in the siege of Beirut and Fatah, Arafat being expelled from the country, and of course now, following last year's round between Israel and Hezbollah, the Americans show up, and that kind of discourse does translate into policy that there is pressure on the Lebanese government to do more. But judging from the last two tries, 2005 and mid 1980s, if you will, the Lebanese government did make efforts, and yet it's overwhelmed by circumstances that seem to always extend beyond the country's borders. And I think this time those circumstances are less. There is weakened obstacles. And very important factor is that the Syrian regime is gone. The Assad regime is in Moscow. You will never have a reconstituted Hezbollah threat that can easily depend on Syria for weapons and more. There's always going to be a shackled Hezbollah. And yes, the Lebanese government should take this opportunity to do more. Yet the vulnerabilities are always there too. And I think at the end of the day, Iran can instigate when it needs to in this country. And Iran can be the spoiler in this story. And that's where I get worried that we may see another round of Lebanese intention, maybe some limited action, and then the attention fades and the status quo returns into a form of stability that's bad for Lebanon. That's always in the back of my mind. And that's why until today, I still see Iran as being able to do more. But I'm guessing from what you're saying is that despite that, the Lebanese government should be willing at least to make more risk at this time.
I I think so. I mean, once again, I don't see an opportunity or in decades for state sovereignty that you have before you. And I'm not going to put my eggs in the Tehran basket, right? I don't think they're going to budge. So I think there has to be a combination of negotiation, economic incentive, rebuilding the South, providing economic opportunity, right? That never existed in large part because of Hezbollah. State presence, right? Not just Hezbollah NGOs or whatnot. To hold something out there, citizenship or whatnot. And at the same time, there has to be some movement on the ground, incremental. Once again, I mean, there's a deadline, and deadlines are good, knowing that it's unrealistic, but a target, and move forward very slowly, but methodically, to try and do this work. We're going to go after this facility. We're going to put some roadblocks in this area. We're going to just do one thing at a time. Yeah, it may take a long time, right? 6 months. This is an army that Iran built in your country, right? It's going to take more than 5, 6 months. But to start the effort, I think we'll gain support. International imagination will be focused on the possibilities, the once in a lifetime possibility for Lebanon, and something that, for a change, that you appear to be really embracing. I don't have any good words because it's incredibly risky.
Actually, that's nice. I'm glad you said risky because I think what's risky also is it's going back to your piece now is the fourth point, which is Israel's reaction towards progress. And I'm saying risky because I think psychologically this determines a lot of how Lebanon sees the Lebanese state's role vis-a-vis Hezbollah right now. Um, it's a I'll ask it in two ways. First, Israel quit Lebanon twice in 2000 and late 2006, early 2007. In 2000, following months, if not years, of loss, Israeli soldiers, whether it was by weeks or by months, getting targeted and killed by Hezbollah, and local opinion within Israel changed that this occupation of southern Lebanon was not necessary, yet Hezbollah was capable still of targeting and killing Israeli soldiers in Lebanon. The Ehud Barak government quit overnight and they left Lebanon with a Hezbollah that was not left in terms of decapitated or degraded or any of that. It was a Hezbollah that was capable of growing further, and the Syrian occupation in Lebanon persisted 5 years after that. End of 2006, early 2007, 1701 has yet to be really implemented in any serious way. And the Israelis are leaving Lebanon again with a Hezbollah that remains, Hezbollah that grows, a Hezbollah that becomes the largest paramilitary force on the planet, and a Hezbollah that keeps the border fairly quiet for the better part of nearly 2 decades until 2023. It's a very quiet, uh, tense perhaps, but quiet border with Israel. The Israelis leave. Now there's 5 hilltops that are being in a way cemented. And I don't know what these hilltops are really there for. And I don't sense, and this is maybe an unpopular opinion in Lebanon, I don't sense that the Israelis have any interest in staying in this country. Actually, I think it's the opposite. I think there's a rejection of Lebanon to the point that, and maybe we can touch on this before we get into Israel's the reaction towards progress on the ground here. I don't think the Israelis care who governs Lebanon, as long as that government doesn't bother them. And I think that's the way they look at more or less the entire region. We had the bin Laden like threat for many years, and suddenly Ahmed al Shara is willing to do indirect or perhaps direct talks with the Israelis on security matters.
Yeah.
And the Israelis don't seem to mind. I actually would go further. Had Hassan Nasrallah somehow found his way into a more authoritarian like rule in this country, I don't think the Israelis would care, as long as there's no threat towards their security concerns in the north. Maybe that's an extreme way of looking at it, but that's the framework I've always looked at it, which is why I'm surprised that they insist on holding on to these 5 hilltops, which goes to the second part. Hezbollah is degraded to the point that they will never seriously fight Israel again. It's hard. It's very hard to imagine a Hezbollah that is willing to take that risk again without being completely eliminated, which is why it surprises me. What is the need to hold on to these 5 strategic hilltops? Is it psychological pressure? Is it a negotiations tactic? What exactly are they in the South for?
Well, it's all of the above. Israel changed on October 7th. They in terms of Lebanon, they for years had allowed or not responded to Hezbollah provocation, drones flying over, setting up the tent on the border, tunnels being dug from Lebanon into Israel, attack tunnels. No real responses. Post October 7th, I think the view is that Israel is going to be the view in Israel, anyway, is that they're going to be more proactive in their self-defense. They're going to take positions on the ground in Syria until they are confident that they have a responsible party on the other side. They're going to take a piece of territory in Lebanon. This is going to protect the northern community, line of sight for anti-tank weapons, and put pressure on Lebanon to carry out its obligations, its responsibilities to exert sovereignty over the state, to be, the one weapon of the state. So it's all of the above, really. Um, as I said, there are some Israelis who believe this makes them more secure for the people in the border communities. There are still Hezbollah. They prevented Tom Barak from flying to taking a helicopter trip to the south yesterday or the day before. Do I think personally that there's a lot of utility in these positions? No. There are some degree of leverage, but I don't believe that Israel has territorial ambitions in Lebanon at all.
But yet that kind of presence in the South does, and I don't know if they care or not, does undermine the government's credibility. And in that,
I wrote it in the piece.
right, exactly.
I think yes, and which is why I had hoped that they might do a little bit more of a goodwill gesture,
Hmm.
whether that is removal of one of these occupied hills, or something that is a little more tangible. These things can be reversed. If the government doesn't move forward, they can go back and take it. They could, once again, the LAF can sit on that hilltop and put a border post. There's plenty of things that could be done that would prevent this post from being retaken by Hezbollah elements or some such problem.
That seems to require more US pressure on the Israeli government for that to actually take shape. That without that type of more assertion, the Israelis will not let go of one or more hilltops in the south. And at this stage, I don't see US pressure pointing in that direction. At least that's what I've understood from recent visits and general policy in general, that general policy towards Lebanon, that now it's all about disarming Hezbollah. And I think
Uh,
it's Lindsey Graham who was a few days ago who said, stop asking us questions about Israel, which is a very clumsy way of talking to the Lebanese crowd. You have
Listen,
to address, yeah,
yeah,
sorry.
the roadmap was clear that there are responsibilities on all sides.
Mm.
This government has undertaken, what is the challenge of a generation for Lebanon, if they see it through. I think Israel has to do something if and when this government starts moving ahead with the plan. I think immediately there has to be something that demonstrates that Israel is watching and that ultimately that they're supportive of this endeavor, not supportive by just killing Hezbollah, something that is important, but moving forward on the ground that Israel has to actually play a part and show that they are, they're part of this, that there's two sides to this equation, and that this is a real hardship for Lebanon right now.
And it can't be that for all these variables to line up, that Lebanon is Switzerland overnight. And that's when the Israelis dislodge themselves from the South. That's fiction. It's not reality.
Agreed.
But I really appreciate your time on this issue. And I know you have to go. So, as always, David Schenker, thank you for joining the podcast. I really appreciate your time.
No, it's great to be with you, Ronnie, and be well, and we'll keep our fingers crossed for you guys.
Next time without a shoulder strap or knee brace or leg injury. Thanks,
God,
David.
God willing, good to see you.